Elizabeth Fowler has provided management system consulting, auditing, and training for the past 20 years. During this time, she's coached private and government organizations on the implementation of diverse management system and conformity assessment standards, including ISO 17024 and 17021. Elizabeth is a member of the U.S. tagged ISO PC 302, Guidelines for Auditing Management Systems, and is actively involved in the current review of ISO 19011. She previously participated in the ISO TC 176 STTG, ISO TC 207 STTF, and ISO CASCO STTF, ISO 17021 2015. Elizabeth, take it away.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be part of this auditor symposium. Thank you very much for inviting me. When I was asked to participate, I was really excited, and I was thinking about a topic that might be interesting to the audience of the symposium. And I asked myself, where are the weaknesses when it comes to the interpretation of the new standards, in particular in relation to auditing these standards? And this brought me to two topics. The first one is the process approach, and as you all know, this is not a new topic at all. However, I have still seen too many auditors who do not seem to understand this concept. And they still try to perform management system audits based on documentation and following the numbering of the requirements of the respective criteria, which usually leads to confusion, and I've seen customers who have not been very happy about this. And the second topic is risk-based thinking. This is not entirely new either. Risk-based thinking has been implicit in most previous versions of the ISO management system standards, but the focus has a little bit shifted since the 2015 version. While it was implicit in planning and in the requirement for preventive action in previous versions, the application of risk-based thinking has now shifted from being a separate requirement, as in preventive action, to becoming part of the overall management system, starting with the planning process. So there are still many question marks when it comes to the interpretation and application of risk-based thinking. And I've seen auditors ask, well, how do we audit that? How can I ask someone if he's thinking in risk? Seems to be a very simple question, but sometimes in its application, it's not as easy to grasp. The same for implementers. They wonder, how can I include risk-based thinking within my management system? I mean, I think about risks all the time, but how can I prove that? What kind of evidence can I show? So I hope that with this presentation, I will be able to clear some doubts. First of all, we will review what most of you already know, the fundamentals of process approach and risk-based thinking as required by the new ISO management system standards based on the high-level structure by ISO. And then we'll talk about how to audit the process approach and risk-based thinking. At the end, we'll talk a little bit also about adding value to the audit, which is something that should be expected from any professional auditor. So starting with the process approach. The ISO high-level structure in the ISO directives establishes for every new ISO management system standard in section 4.4 that the management system, for the management system, which could be a quality management system, environmental management system, etc., the organization shall establish, implement, maintain, and continually improve a management system, which could be quality, environmental, etc., including the processes needed and their interactions in accordance with the requirements of this international standard. The language has not changed, but now it is included in section 4.4 of all these new standards. The process approach has always also been included within the ISO family, or ISO 9000 family of standards, rather, as one of the core quality management principles. And it reads, consistent and predictable results are achieved more effectively and efficiently when activities are understood and managed as interrelated processes that function as a coherent system. If you read the standard and analyze it in detail, you will find that this process approach involves all the activities related to the organization in relation to its quality management system, with the focus on consistently meeting customer requirements, and also on adding value and on measuring the effective performance that would lead to continual improvement of the management system. So there are these factors. It's meeting the requirements, adding value, effective process performance, and improvement. As we know, every organization has a series of activities that need to be performed in order to transform a customer need into a finished product or service that satisfies that need. And if we group all these activities together, they can be seen as a series of processes. Let's look at that. A process, by definition, must have defined objectives. What do you want to achieve? It should have defined inputs, as in what's my customer need? That's where it starts. And based on that need, what are the specifications? What are the required outputs? Meaning, have I met those needs of my customers? What are the requirements that I have to have met? And have I met them? I need to analyze and show through my measuring and monitoring activities that, yeah, I did meet those requirements, or I did not. And if I have not, what are the activities that I have performed to correct the situation and, of course, prevent it from happening. A process also looks at defined resources. Now, if you have not defined your objectives, your inputs, your outputs, your activities, and your resources, how will you be able to know if your processes are effective? And this is really a weak point in most organizations. Well, you find nice process flowcharts explaining step-by-step the activities. But if you ask, how do you measure if the process is effective, you won't get a reasonable answer. According to ISO 9001, processes should be analyzed, monitored, measured, and improved. How can you do that if you don't even know what you should expect, if you don't even know what your customer wants from you, and if you don't even know how you're going to measure if that customer requirement was met? And there's more. In most cases, it's not even clear who owns a process or who is responsible for a process. In other words, the term process owner has not been introduced into ISO 9001. However, it is a common term in some industries. If you don't want to use that term, just talk about the responsibilities. Who is responsible for a process? In a typical traditional organization, you have a department manager or supervisor who are responsible for everything within the department. However, that might not be enough. Let's look at an example. A textile manufacturing facility where they make uniforms. The production manager is responsible for making the products, the uniforms, to specifications, and to get those uniforms done on time, to ship the orders out on time. Under his responsibility, there are several processes. There's planning, cutting, kitting, assembly or sewing, cleaning, etc. A series of processes that fall under the responsibility of the production manager. But in this example, who is responsible for cutting? The production manager is he the process owner for cutting? In a greater sense, yes, because if cutting is not done right or on time, then the product won't be done right or be ready on time, and it won't be shipped out on time, and he is the one who will be made accountable for it. But is the production manager the one who actually operates the cutting machine or who is in charge of the cutting department? No, he's not. Yes, he's still responsible for the overall performance of the cutting department, together with all the other departments that fall under production management, but he is not the process owner of cutting. The process owner is the person who is in charge of cutting, and he or she is the one who does this work every day. So that person should know what the objectives are of the specific process, meaning what are the specifications and what are the requirements. The process owner should know exactly what he or she needs in order to perform the activities. He or she should know who is their customer and who is the one who supplies what he or she needs, meaning who provides the specifications, who provides the orders, who provides all the information that is needed in order to have an effective cutting process in place. So the process owner definitely is the person in charge of cutting. And the definition of responsibilities is also one of the weak points I have found in many organizations. Sometimes there is this discrepancy between responsibility and authority. You may be responsible for something, but you don't have the authority to actually do it or stop doing it. But that's a whole different issue, which you definitely need to look at when you audit, and you'll come across it if you use the process approach and look at responsibilities and authorities that have been assigned. Processes should be analyzed, monitored, measured, and improved. That's wording that comes out of the standard. So in order to know if your process is effective, you need to know what are the goals, what are the specific objectives of this process, and you need to measure against those objectives and determine if you have met the goals, and if you're not, what you need to do in order to meet those goals and then improve on the effectiveness. This little chart comes out directly from the ISO 9001 standard, 9001:2015, excuse me, and this is just to enhance that process approach by looking at one specific process where you have the sources of the inputs, which are the predecessors of the process. You have the actual inputs, which would be all kinds of resources like energy, materials, machinery, etc., that you need. You have the activities within the process, and then you have the output, which should be something that has been transformed, an input that has been transformed into an output. And then the receivers of the output, which are your customers. It all starts with the customer requirements, and it ends with the customer requirements. Every organization has a series of processes, and you can name them however you want. Some people name them key processes, core processes, main processes, whatever you want, but those are usually those processes that directly transform in a series of activities those inputs into outputs in order to meet customer requirements. These processes should also be linked together, and they should be connected somehow to management processes and to supporting processes. Now, examples. A core process could be, in the example that we talked about before, in the textile manufacturing, core process could be the actual manufacturing part of it, which will have several sub-processes. We won't get into that. Supporting processes, for example, could be the maintenance process or the processes of the human resource department, which would include hiring, firing, training, etc. And management processes are all those other processes to lead the organization towards strategic goals and to provide whatever is needed so that the processes can be performed effectively. But always remember, it starts with the requirements of the customer and ends with the requirements being met. Now, usually, most organizations I've seen, the activities within a process are well defined and they don't have as many problems as those linkages between processes where one process ends and the next process begins. For example, in the textile manufacturing example, you have cutting. Now all those pieces are cut and now they need to go to the sewing department. That is where you would usually find errors because of lack of communication or because personnel has not been well trained and doesn't really know what to do. There are many issues. So as an implementer, you may want to make sure that those linkages are well defined. And as an auditor as well, you want to look at how they have defined those linkages. And in other words, that chain of custody. Now I've finished my product, this my output becomes your input. And so what are you going to do with it? And how are you going to receive it? How am I going to give it to you? And whenever those linkages are not well defined, there is something may or probably will go wrong within an organization. Remember, in a chain, the chain is as strong or as strong as its weakest link. You can say a management system is as strong as its weakest link. Now let's talk about risk-based thinking. This is a term that is new to many and quite confusing to most of the people I've talked to. As per definition, and this definition is also part of the ISO Annex SL, the high-level structure, the definition of risk is the effect of uncertainty. Let's think about that. Something uncertain is something unknown. So how can we control it if it is unknown? Hence, it is a risk. The definition also includes several notes. It says an effect is a deviation from the expected. It can be positive or negative. Okay, so the outcome is not always negative. It can also be positive. Keep that in mind. And uncertainty is the state, even partial, of deficiency of information related to understanding or knowledge or an event, its consequences or likelihood. That means, in other terms, that something is uncertain when there's not enough information, understanding, or knowledge in relation to an event, its consequences, or its likelihood. Okay, let me repeat this. Something is uncertain when there is not enough information, understanding, or knowledge in relation to an event, its consequences, or likelihood. Okay? If I want to know the weather tomorrow, I don't know. This is uncertain. I can look at the weather report and I will know a little bit more. The level of uncertainty decreases, yet I can still not trust 100% the weather report because they are not 100% precise as of yet. Okay. So, based on that definition, uncertainty is the state of deficiency of information, understanding, or knowledge of an event, its consequences, or likelihood. We can say that the more I know about a process, the lower is the level of uncertainty, the lower is the level of risk. And a high level of uncertainty means that there is a higher level of risk. Of course, the risk is also determined by the potential consequences and the likelihood of an event. There may be catastrophic consequences, so the level of risk is obviously higher than by some issues that don't really have very significant consequences for the organization or for the quality management system. Another factor you can build in is detectability. There may be a high risk that is not easily detectable that will cause more headaches, I would say, in order to control that. Because if you can't detect it, but the risk is very high to have catastrophic consequences, then you certainly have to do something about it in order to increase the detectability and or lower the level of risk related to this potential event. So how do you address risks in order to reach conformity to ISO 9001 requirements as an example? The standard does not require the application of a specific risk methodology. However, you do need to address risks within your management system. And we'll talk about it in detail a little bit further ahead. But here's a simple way you can do this without going into a specific methodology. And that's just like a recipe, a step-by-step list. You can examine every process within the quality management system, starting with the main processes or core processes. Identify the risk factors, the level of uncertainty, okay? Meaning you define how much do I know about this and how much can I control about this. You analyze and prioritize those risks. Out of those risk factors that you have determined, you will most likely want to know which of those are really significant or may have a major impact on my organization or on my quality management system, and based on the likelihood and the consequences, because you may come up with a very long list of potential risks, but you may not have the resources to address all of them, at least at the same time. So you want to prioritize them. Then you implement actions to address those risks. You define those actions first. What can we do in order to reduce that risk? For example, with the weather, I don't know how the weather is going to be tomorrow. I don't have access to any weather forecast, but it looks like it's going to rain. So, and I don't want to get wet, so I may want to bring something to protect me from the rain or avoid being outdoors. That would be potential controls for me to lower that risk of getting wet. You implement that plan by assigning responsibilities and taking action, and then you monitor those actions and verify if those controls are really effective in reducing that risk, because sometimes controls are implemented just for the sake of it, but the risk is still there. And then you learn from experience, meaning, okay, this control did not work. I have to change the control, okay? Or this worked really well, and I can actually apply the same control to a different process within my organization or within my quality management system. Let's look at a very simple example. And this is something that happens to me once in a while. Okay, on my way to an important meeting, I want to get my favorite coffee, okay? And in order to get that coffee, I have to get out of my way. I have to drive somewhere else. So, what are my requirements in this scenario? The requirements to be met are, first, I need to be on time for the meeting, and Second, I want coffee so that I feel fit for the meeting. Okay? Now, which are the factors that I control? It's the time I leave home, and it's the distance and route I choose. Okay? Those are definitely factors that are fully under my control. But there are also other factors that are not under my control, that are uncertain. And those factors include the traffic. I don't know how much traffic I will encounter on my way to the cafeteria and from there, or to the coffee shop and from there to the meeting. And there's another factor I cannot control, which is the time I will spend at the cafe. Will there be parking? How many people will be in there? How quick are the baristas who serve the coffee? I have no idea. So there is really a high level of uncertainty involved. Now, for identifying the risks, what would I do? I would determine if I get my coffee, I may be late for the meeting. That is a big risk. And the second risk is if I don't get my coffee, I might fall asleep or be cranky or not reach the meeting goals. Okay, that's another big risk. If we try to understand those risks, it's definitely unacceptable to be late for the meeting. At least for me, it would be. And it would also be unacceptable to fall asleep or be inefficient at the meeting or during the meeting or during the rest of the day. Now, how can I avoid or mitigate the risk? Control the, meaning that how can I control the likelihood and the impact? First, I could allow sufficient time to stop by for coffee and get to the meeting on time. Now, how would I do that? How would I implement that plan for allowing for sufficient time? I calculate the traffic time. In the worst case scenario, I prepare alternate routes and I calculate the latest departure time from cafe so that I'd still make it to the meeting, even without coffee. I know I have to leave 7:45 to be there by 8, considering all those risks. Okay. For the second risk, not getting the coffee, to mitigate that risk, I could someone else to bring the coffee, but that will probably not work. It's not a feasible option. So I'm going back to risk number 1, about calculating traffic, controlling really that time, that level of uncertainty of time. So I tried, I calculated, I implement the plan, I leave early enough, I go to the coffee shop, I make sure I leave there on time to make it to the meeting. And then I check, did it work? Did I get the coffee and arrive to the meeting on time? And the answer will be yes or no. If it's no, then I need to change something to my plan. And I need to look at the risks. Maybe there was another risk I had not contemplated. Maybe my car needed maintenance and I forgot that maintenance. And it stopped. It just left me there and I lost time waiting for backup. So I look at all this. If I made it on time, then maybe this plan was great. And next time I'll do it again and I'll check it again. Did it work again? And over time, I will monitor this and find out that my plan was actually really great and it can be improved. Maybe I don't have to leave that early. Maybe there's a better route to the cafe or from the cafe to the office. And those are the opportunities that will present themselves once I start looking at the risks and the plan. This is just a very, very simple example. And if you try to apply this example to everyday activities, you will find yourself doing this all the time. Maybe not in relation to coffee, but maybe in relation to other things, where you take decisions. And before you take a decision, you contemplate the different scenarios. You think about what could happen, what could go wrong, and you prepare for it, and you try to avoid that. And the same is true for any organization. Risk is inherent in all aspects of a quality management system. Risk is inherent in all of the processes within a quality management system. And risk per se has always been implicit and addressed in the ISO 9001 standards. By including risk-based thinking now, it becomes proactive rather than reactive. That means it is embedded within the management system from the planning stage on. So instead of planning a management system, doing the activities, and then improving by implementing corrective and preventive actions, now you are required to think about the risk from the moment you plan your management system. The ISO 9001:2015 requirements in relation to risk-based thinking are the following. And if you look through the standard, it starts with the introduction. In the introduction, within the standard, it describes the concept of risk-based thinking, and there's also an annex that talks about it. ISO TC 176, the technical committee that created the standard, or that is responsible for the standard, also published a couple of guidance documents. One of them is being referenced within ISO 9001, and you can find them online. And then when you start looking at the actual requirements of the standard, the shells, you'll find the first time the word risk in section 4. And it appears to be exact in 441, where it talks about the organization shall determine the processes needed for the quality management system and the applications throughout the organization, and shall address the risks and opportunities as determined in accordance with the requirements of 6.1. So it sends you actually to 6.1. And 6.1 sends you back to 4.1 and 4.2 by stating that the organization shall consider the issues referred to in 4.1 and the requirements referred to in 4.2 and determine the risks and opportunities that need to be addressed to give assurance that the QMS can achieve its intended results, etc., and shall plan actions to address these risks and opportunities, etc. So section 4 in 441 sends you to section 6, and 6.1 sends you back to 4. It's a kind of circular reference, and it's worth analyzing it so that we understand what it actually means. Clause 6 reads that when planning for the quality management system, the organization shall consider the issues referred to in 4.1 and the requirements referred to in 4.2 and determine the risks and opportunities that need to be addressed. 4.1 is about understanding the context of the organization, determining the external and internal issues of the organization. 4.2 is about understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. First, of course, you need to determine which are those interested parties and then determine which are their needs in relation to the scope of the QMS. Something to be careful about is that 4.2 does not imply the extension of the quality management system requirements beyond the scope of the actual standard. And as stated in the scope, ISO 9001 is applicable where an organization needs to demonstrate its ability to consistently provide products and services that meet customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements and aims to enhance customer satisfaction. So don't get environmental issues involved here or safety issues, etc., unless they have to do with the quality management system. and the specific objectives related to the quality management system as established by its leadership. So let's analyze this again. Remember, section 4 sends you to 6, and 6 references you back to 4. Let's look at the organization and its context. External issues include, and this is wording directly from the standard, they include legal, technological, competitive, market, cultural, and other issues which the organization needs to determine. Internal issues include values of the organization, culture, and knowledge, etc. 4.2, interested parties typically include customers, suppliers, personnel, owners, neighbors, government agency, you name it. It depends on every organization, every industry, location, and many, many other issues. Here's just a couple of them, which pretty much apply to any type of organization. And requirements of interested parties typically include factors such as quality in the sense of delivering the products or services as agreed, according to specific requirements that have to be met, including the time. Every customer wants what they ordered to be delivered to them on time. And if you want a really happy customer, communication usually is also a factor. And there are many others to consider depending on the type of organization, like I said before. Suppliers are interested in good communication, so they know what you expect from them, and of course they want to get paid on time. Personnel is interested in having a safe work environment and defined responsibilities and authorities. They want to get paid on time. They want to have a safe work environment. Want to be sure they come home at the end of the day, right? And there may be many more interested parties who all have interests and who affect the quality management system. Going back to 6.1, it clearly establishes that you have to take into consideration these two important things: the context of the organization and the interested parties. So, when you address risk within your organization, this is exactly what you have to look at. Okay? So, that's where it all starts. Where is the risk in relation to these two? Now, let's look again at a specific example, because some people come to me and ask me, can we conclude that risk-based thinking applies to all the processes of the QMS? Just by looking at the standard itself, there is no direct answer. If an auditee asks you, you cannot point to one specific requirement that would state that risk-based thinking has to be applied to all the processes of the QMS. But let's see what's happening here. Let's look at this example. A printing services company, including graphic design. You know, one of these places that you go to, or nowadays you probably would contact online because you need, for example, business cards. The company offers graphic design, printing, and delivery, and have different types of paper, from very basic paper to very fine paper to sparkling paper to engraved paper, whatever. You can choose whatever you want. Now, what are the processes within this organization? I guess it's safe to say, without really knowing this kind of organization very well, but it's safe to say that they have a sales and customer service department. They have graphic design, they have printing, they have delivery, they have invoicing, and all these we could consider our main processes because they are directly related to the customer. And they have additional supplemental or supporting processes, which is purchasing of raw materials, equipment maintenance, human resource processes, quality assurance, management processes, you name it. Now, which of these processes affect the organization's ability to meet their customer goals? The customer, of course, wants to receive the business cards on time. They need to look professional. They should not have any typos or errors. The print quality must be excellent without any stains or extra lines. And of course, the customer needs these cards, well, usually urgently, right? Like by tomorrow. Now, which of these processes have to do with those customer needs? Let's first see what are the risks actually that we may not deliver on time, that we have errors on those business cards, that the paper was not the right paper, that it was not well cut, etc. So these are all the risks that really affect us. So which of these processes come in place here? Which of these processes do we need to control to avoid those risks, or at least minimize those risks? Sales and customer service? I believe so, right? Because they are in charge of communicating with the customer. If they don't understand what the customer wants from them, then there is no way they can deliver what is expected from them. Graphic design, same thing. They need to understand what the customer wants. So you have a communication process there in place that is very, very important. Printing, absolutely. If the printing process doesn't go well, those business cards won't come out right. Delivery, yes, the customer wants those cards tomorrow. They need to be delivered by tomorrow. Invoicing, yep, the customer doesn't want to pay more than expected, right? Purchasing, absolutely. If you don't have the paper in stock that you need to print those business cards the customer wants from you, then you cannot deliver on time, right? And all those other processes, equipment maintenance is important. If your printer is not working right, then the product won't come out right. HR processes, quality assurance, management processes, those are all important, because if there's any issue or any hole in any of these processes, then you won't meet those final goal of making the customer happy. So when you audit risk-based thinking, this is probably the most practical approach you can get. You start by looking at their processes and ask them if they have considered risk, and they should come up with something similar to this. And there's many tools they can use, or different types of evidence, but in essence, this is what they should have in place within their organization. Somehow they need to relate their internal and external issues and their interested parties' requirements to their processes, determine the risks that are related to meeting their goals and objectives, and control those risks and monitor those risks and verify if their plan is working, if it's effective, and if overall the performance of the QMS is as required or as established by top management. So can we conclude that risk-based thinking applies to all the processes of the QMS? Well, based on this example, yes. And I dare to say that in most organizations, the answer would be yes. However, remember, there is no specific requirement that states that there must be some risk analysis for every single process. And there's overall no specific requirements that requires a specific method. We talked already about the types of risks here. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. There's risk is mentioned in all other clauses within ISO 9001. And here's a summary in relation to risk-based thinking. In particular, clauses 4, 5, and 6 call out for the organization to address risks and opportunities and to take appropriate actions to address them. Section 6 clearly establishes this. It's not here because we just talked about it in the previous slide. Clause 7 says the organization is required to determine and provide necessary resources. And if we link that back to section 4 and 6, then we can determine that this is also related to risk. Of course, resources are also one important factor to make every process work. Clause 8 states that the organization is required to manage its operational processes where risk is implicit whenever suitable or appropriate is mentioned, meaning that based on that risk analysis the organization has performed, somehow they need to have a plan in place. So based on that plan, there may be some activities that need to be done within the organization, even though they're not specifically required within the standard. Also, the level or the extent of documentation within the organization usually depends on the level of risk. Clause 9 states that the organization is required to monitor, measure, analyze, and evaluate the effectiveness of actions taken to address the risks and opportunities. We mentioned that before. And Clause 10 states that the organization is required to correct, prevent, or reduce undesired effects and improve the QMS and update risks and opportunities. This is important. Your risks change over time. Therefore, you have to keep in mind that your analysis of risks needs to be updated as the conditions of your organization change. There may be, for example, different requirements by your customers or new customers, or new employees or new technology. In summary, different internal or external issues that affect your quality management system need to be taken into consideration. And that takes us right back to section 4, right? Take into consideration those internal and external issues of your organization. So your risk analysis, whatever method is used in an organization, is a living document. And when you audit that, you want to make sure that they don't have one dusty paper sitting somewhere with a risk study they did 2 years ago, and in the meantime, everything has changed. So that's definitely an audit trail. You have to look into that and see if they have monitored their risk plan and if they have done any updates. Again, no specific methodology is required. It's really up to the organization. Benefits from risk-based thinking, of course, include achieving the stated business objectives of your organization, or at least it helps in achieving the business objectives. It contributes to producing more consistent outputs. It contributes to enhancing the confidence in delivering expected results, which then may lead to less stress within the organization. It contributes to enhance customer satisfaction by meeting the requirements in a consistent manner, and it will help increase the effectiveness of your operations in alignment with strategic business objectives. And that will make other interested parties very, very happy. So risk-based thinking, if well done within an organization, should really bring all these benefits with it. It's new to many organizations to think about risk in this way, but from what I've seen, once they understand the concept, they really like it, because it really gives them a tool to think more systematically about their risks and to address the risk systematically. And that's what all of this is actually about. And of course, getting my hot coffee and still making it on time to the meeting. That's just a little joke apart. So when we audit the process approach and risk-based thinking, there are some key questions we want to take into consideration. Remember, auditing risk-based thinking is not a standalone activity, but it should be implicit during the entire audit of the management system based on processes. And for that, you need to ask the following questions. Have the processes and their interactions been established? Have objectives, inputs, outputs, activities, and resources been defined for all of these processes? How have potential risks and opportunities been identified in relation to the context of the organization and the requirements and the needs of interested parties? Have risks been addressed, controlled, and is there follow-up to verify that if these controls are effective in reducing the risks? Are processes analyzed, monitored, measured, and improved? Are processes effective in reaching the established objectives aligned to the strategic direction of the organization? Is the extent of documentation of the documented information adequate to provide objective evidence of the application of risk-based thinking? So these are questions that you have to have in mind when you audit a management system. Okay, it's not a question that you go up and ask directly. I mean, you can, but it would probably be very confusing to the auditee. Things you need to look at or to look for to see if risk-based thinking is part of the systematic approach within the organization or the process approach. They might have meeting minutes where they discussed the risks and they define plans, action plans, they define responsibilities. And then in the next meeting, there's a follow-up, and they come up with measurements and they come up with results of what has happened. And it turns out that, yes, we actually got this process under control and we minimized our risk. There may also be a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That's also a very good tool. And of course, there should be an action plan in place. What are we going to do about this? They may also use reports on customer feedback, brainstorming and activities, competitor analysis, management review. That's another place to look at, which they might show you as evidence that they have included risk-based thinking within their organization. So there's many ways they can do that. So your question will be, how have you addressed risk-based thinking within your quality management system? And how do you evaluate the effectiveness of those actions, whatever actions they have chosen within the organization? Typical audit questions, and this is nothing new. I know that the only new part is probably the risk part, but the typical audit questions are, explain what you're doing. That's kind of an opening question, especially when you audit someone who gets really nervous. And it's a good way for you as an auditor to understand the process that you're actually auditing or the activity within a process. What is the desired outcome, the process output? So what are you doing? What are the specifications that you are producing to? What information or resources do you need to do your work? Do you have specifications, or do you use work orders? What kind of resources do you use? Materials, equipment, etc. Who provides them, etc. Where does all this come from? What's the previous process or the previous processes that apply to you? How do you know how to do your job? Are there any procedures or work instruction or through training? And remember, it's wrong to ask for a procedure just because. And I have seen that. I have seen auditors who go and ask, where's your management review procedure? Or where is your purchasing procedure? that is not acceptable because there is no such requirement. There is no requirement for a documented procedure. And especially with ISO 9001, it talks about documented processes a lot and documented information, but you cannot assume that the organization has documented procedures in place. And I remember this one occasion where the auditor, it was doing a third-party audit, asked the auditee, show me a procedure for management review. And she was very scared and nervous, and she didn't know what to say. And then finally, she dared to say, I don't have a procedure. And he was going to write up a nonconformity. I was sitting there as a consultant, and she looked at me very scared, and I dared to interrupt, which I usually wouldn't do, but I just asked the auditor, okay, why are you asking for a procedure? And he says, because I want to see a procedure. And then finally the auditee reacted. She found her strengths again, and she says, but where does it require that I must have a management review procedure? It doesn't say in the standard. So the auditor responded, well, it doesn't hurt to ask. And overall, that explained why this organization had about 300 procedures. That's how we found them, having 300 procedures, because during their previous audits, they were being asked for a documented procedure for every single requirement of the standard. And they just didn't know any better because their consultant also had told them that that's what they needed to do, and their third-party auditors kept asking them for documented procedures. So don't go that way, all right? You can ask them how or where have you established your processes? How have you defined them? How do you control them? Do you have any documented information? You can do all that, but don't ask for something that is not required within the standard. The next question would be, who receives the result of your work, meaning who is your internal customer or external customer for some processes, definitely. And how do you know if you have done your job well? Wow, that's a very good question, right? And sometimes you don't get such a good answer. So there should be some measurements of effectiveness in place, okay? Somehow the process owner should be aware if a job is well done or not. And this should be measured within the quality management system, and this is required. Now about risk-based thinking, a very good question. When you, for example, when you audit operations, just ask what can go wrong, because you're not going to ask an operator, a line operator, are you thinking about risks or things like that? They would probably not understand what you're talking about. So just ask, what can go wrong here? And they'll tell you. And then you also get a picture if management actually got it right with their risk analysis, because maybe they haven't considered all risks within their processes. And the next question would be, how do you prevent this from happening? So there should be some controls in place in order to control those risks. A practical audit approach, and again, I know most of you are very familiar with this, but there's still a lot of auditors out there who are not very familiar with this. So this is just a good practice. This is not required. So starting with the documentation review and the stage 1 audit in case of third-party audits, that's where you get familiarized with the organization and its processes. Once you're on site, after the opening meeting, you would typically start by interviewing top management to get to know where they're standing, their objectives, and their commitment with the organization. This is good practice. In some industries, like the automotive industry, it's actually required to start with top management. But ISO 19011, which is the guidance document for auditing, doesn't really tell you this. But again, it's a good way to start. because it does give you that overview of the organization, and it will give you some audit trails to follow throughout the audit. You then follow a process. You can go either upstream or downstream. That means you either start with a customer order and follow the trail from purchasing the materials all the way until confirmation of receipt by the customer, or you follow an order from meeting the delivery requirements all the way back to the customer's orders. And while you do that, you audit each process and verify if there are defined objectives, if these objectives have been met based on the measurement and analysis data they should have available, and if the processes were performed as established, meaning their work instructions should have been followed, or their documented procedures, or their training procedures, or their plans, whatever they have in place, whatever they show you as evidence and that works for them. You'll also check if they have appropriate resources and if the personnel working in these processes is competent. So going back to that chart we already looked at the beginning, remember it all starts with customer requirements and it ends with customer satisfaction. And of course it goes in a circle with improvement, but we're not talking about that today. So you'd go and audit the core processes, either upstream or downstream. And then from there you spread out to management processes and supporting processes. You'll come across issues that require further clarification, that may potentially be nonconformities, and these form your audit trails. So that's where you take note of what you've seen, of what is potentially not conforming, and that's where you follow that trail. But remember, actually, when you audit a management system, the objective is usually to determine conformity of the management system, and on the way you may come across nonconformities. As auditing tools, typical tools to be used are audit checklists and process diagrams. In any case, remember that you audit the process and not the element of the standard. All right? You don't go in and say, oh, 4.1, blah, 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 blah. No. You prepare to audit the processes of the organization. Therefore, your audit checklist needs to be prepared for each process you will audit. And once you have determined all the elements of the process, you can add on all the specific requirements of the standard that apply to this process. So you have that reference. But first, think about the process. Don't think first about the requirement. You may also use a process diagram, which will show you at one site all the elements of the process, including inputs, outputs, measurements, resources, customers, etc. Typical process diagrams that are often used are the SIPOC, which is the supplier input process output customer diagram, or the turtle diagram, but there are many, many more. If you're lucky, when you ask for your auditees documentation for documentation review, they have all this already done and you can use it. However, remember, you have to verify everything. They'll give you something, but you still have to apply your own judgment and add your own questions and references to those diagrams. If they don't have it, or if whatever they have doesn't seem to be useful to you, then it's good practice to develop your own process diagrams to which you can audit, or audit checklists based on processes. It's also very practical to have a process matrix where you link each process of the organization to the requirement. And remember, again, you start with the process, don't start with the requirement. So you would look at, for example, sales and customer service, which is definitely a customer-oriented process or main process. And then you would see, okay, what requirements of ISO 9001 apply to this process. So you need to take this into consideration when you audit. And if you find any nonconformity, then it will probably be link directly to one of these requirements. And like this, you mark off with an X every field, and once this matrix is populated, you will see if you have addressed all the processes and if you have addressed all the requirements within the standards that you're auditing to. Conclusion. I hope that after listening to me for a while, you conclude that auditing, risk-based thinking, and using the process approach is easier than you thought. I really hope so. Remember, auditing is supposed to be an activity that should lead to the improvement of the management system. Okay? This is very important. This is why our profession exists. And this is why, hopefully, our profession will become more and more important, as tendencies have shown during the past years. There are more and more organizations that implement and get certified to management systems. To show the importance of the auditing as one of the elements to improve the management system, as an auditor, you have the tools to actually add value through the audit. And how do you do that? If you look at the definitions for adding value, there are many definitions, but all focus on the concept of adding value means something being useful. When a management system is integrated in the way an organization does business, it is most likely useful in helping them achieve their strategic business objectives. So it adds value, meaning it makes happy customers, less scrap, more sales, more profit, less stress. And when a management system consists of a set of procedures, you won't see that. So remember that. As an auditor, in order to add value, you need to verify the conformity of the organization to the audit criteria, but also the organization's ability to meet strategic objectives. Very important to identify the problems, which, if resolved, will enhance the organization's performance, and to identify improvement opportunities and possible areas of risk. If you do that, and if you do that right, you will add value to the organization, and they will appreciate your audit. And to do that, it is very important to do your audit using the process approach and to include also that risk-based thinking within your audit. This is the end. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I truly hope that this has been helpful. Thank you and goodbye.
This ends today's presentation. Thanks for attending.